The rejection ceremony was supposed to break her. Every Omega in Ashville knew what happened to those who had no mate, no pack, no one to stand for them when the blood moon rose. They were cast out, catalogued as lesser, given 3 days of food and sent into the wilderness to live or die by their own measure. Lyra had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. She stood at the center of the ceremonial ring, bare feet on cold stone, wearing the plain grey shift that marked the unclaimed. Around her, the entire pack of Ashville had gathered in their finery, their breath misting in the autumn air, their eyes glittering with something that looked too close to hunger for her comfort. Alphadorin stood at the head of the ring, thick-necked and self-important, his fat gold chain catching the torchlight. "Lyra of no house," he announced. "Omega unbonded, unclaimed. As is tradition, I call upon the moon goddess to—" "Stop!" Her voice surprised even her. The crowd went silent. She had not meant to speak. She had told herself she would accept it quietly, the way she had accepted every other cruelty this pack had visited upon her since the night her mother died, and left her alone at 15 with no one to protect her. She had accepted the cold rooms, the half-rations, the nightly visits from Doran's sons who thought an unclaimed Omega had no right to say no. She had accepted all of it, but something in her chest, something old, something she had kept sealed for years, would not let her accept this in silence. "I accept the rejection," she said, loudly enough for the whole circle to hear. "I accept it willingly, but I will not kneel." The tradition demanded she kneel. It demanded she press her forehead to the stone and beg the pack's forgiveness for the sin of being unwanted. She didn't beg. She stood straighter instead. And that was when she heard it. A stillness that moved through the crowd like a wave, starting at the far edge of the gathering and rippling inward, heads turning, bodies stepping back. She didn't understand what was happening until she saw the wolves. They were massive, silver-black and silent, their eyes like cold amber, moving through the crowd without touching a single soul. 6 of them, arranged in a perfect formation, and at their center, walking as if the world had been built specifically to hold the weight of him, was a man. She had never seen the Alpha King in person. She had heard the stories. Everyone had. King Kaelin of the Northern Throne, who had taken the crown at 19 after his father was murdered by a rival clan, who had spent the next 8 years bleeding his enemies dry and building a kingdom from ruin. He was said to be brilliant. He was said to be pitiless. He was said to be so cold that the frost came first when he walked into a room, a physical thing, winter announcing itself before winter arrived. He was also, she realized, watching her. Not the crowd, not Doran, her. His eyes were pale grey, the color of frozen river ice, and they did not move from her face as his wolves parted the crowd and brought him to the edge of the stone ring. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Alphadorin, and something in his expression shifted. It didn't become angry, it became emptier, which was somehow worse. "I received a report," the king said, his voice low and perfectly even, "that an Omega in this pack had been unlawfully mistreated for the past 3 years, that food was withheld, that members of this pack took liberties with her person against her will." He paused. "I came to see if the report was accurate." The silence was absolute. "The ceremony is over," he said. "She's coming with me." She had not been given a choice. Not really. But Lyra had learned, long ago, that choice was a luxury, and she had long since stopped waiting for it to be offered. She sat in the back of the king's carriage, wrapped in a cloak that smelled like pine and cold stone, and watched Ashville disappear into the dark behind her. Beside her, a young woman with a round face and quick brown eyes introduced herself as Bryn, lady's maid, assigned to Lyra's care for the duration of the journey. "Don't be frightened," Bryn said. He's not going to hurt you. He's not that kind of man." "What kind of man is he?" Lyra asked. Bryn considered this. "The kind who doesn't let himself be any kind of man at all, if he can help it." It was the most honest answer anyone had given her in years. The Northern Keep was everything the stories had promised, and nothing she had expected. It was vast, cold in the way that old stone holds cold deep in its bones. The halls were lined with weapons that had actually been used, not decorative ones. The servants moved efficiently without the anxious scurrying she had seen in Doran's house. No one seemed afraid exactly, but everyone seemed careful. She was given her own chambers, a fire, a meal that was the largest she had eaten in 3 years. She sat at the table and stared at the food for a moment. Then she ate every single thing on the plate. The king came to her that evening. He didn't sit. He stood in the doorway, his massive frame making the entrance look narrow, and studied her with those river ice eyes in a way that felt less like desire and more like assessment. "I need something from you," he said. "In exchange you will be safe here, fed, housed, treated with dignity." "What do you need?" she asked. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Whatever the answer cost him, it was not nothing. "I am cursed," he said. She hadn't expected that.
The curse manifests as a slow decay of control. My wolf, my power, it becomes harder to contain, harder to direct. In time, without an anchor, it will consume me. I will cease to be a king and become only a beast." He paused. "Reports indicate that your bloodline carries a gift, an ability to stabilize, to ground. Whether it manifests in you, I cannot be certain, but I intend to find out." She looked at him for a long moment. "You want me to be your anchor? I want to know if you can be." It was not a kind offer. It was a bargain, clean and unsentimental. He was not pretending otherwise. "And if I can't?" she asked. "Then you will still be fed and housed and safe," he said. "I keep my word." She believed him. She didn't know why, but she did. "All right," she said. "Then we have a bargain." She learned quickly that the keep ran on its own logic.
The king's council met at dawn and sometimes again at dusk. His generals came and went. His uncle, Lord Aldrich, moved through the halls with a quiet authority that suggested he considered himself the true power in the room, a suspicion that Lyra catalogued and set aside. Aldrich was smooth in the way of old oil, grey at the temples, silver-tongued, perpetually kind in a way that never quite reached his eyes. He greeted Lyra with warmth when they were first introduced. He called her "dear girl" and expressed tremendous sympathy for her difficult situation. He said the keep would be so much warmer for her presence. She thanked him politely and made sure to remember every word. Bryn was her closest companion in those first weeks. Bryn, who knew every corridor of the keep and every piece of gossip that moved through it, who brought Lyra warm broth when the nights grew cold and sat with her by the fire to teach her the names and faces of the court. "Lord Aldrich has been regent before," Bryn said one night, her voice low. "During the dark years when the king first took the throne and the enemies were circling. He managed things then." A pause. "Some say he was sorry to give it up." Lyra turned that over in her mind and said nothing. The first time her power showed itself was in the 7th week. She had gone to the king's study, as was now their habit each evening, not for any formal purpose, but because something between them had begun to establish itself, a quiet ritual of proximity, a recognition that they were each calmer when the other was near. She had not named it yet. She suspected he hadn't either. He was standing at the window, and something was wrong. She could feel it before she saw it. A vibration in the air, a discord, as if the room itself was pulling apart at the seams. And then she saw the frost creeping up the glass from where his hand rested against it, spreading outward in fractal patterns, and she saw his knuckles white against the pane, and his jaw so tight she was surprised his teeth didn't shatter. She crossed the room without thinking. She put her hand over his. The warmth that came up through her palm surprised her. She hadn't known she could do that. It didn't feel like a decision. It felt like breathing, like her body simply redirecting something it had always held, but never released. The frost stopped. She felt him go still beside her, as absolutely still as an animal that has heard something it cannot place. "That," he said after a long moment, "is what I was looking for." "Does it help?" she asked. His hand turned under hers. He didn't take it away. His fingers closed over hers instead, gently, like a man who was not accustomed to being gentle and was choosing it carefully. "Yes," he said, "it helps." There was a woman at court named Lady Seraphine. Lyra had seen her before, naturally. She was the kind of woman who made herself impossible to overlook, all dark hair and perfect posture, and the particular social grace of someone raised, knowing they were exactly what others wanted. She was Lord Aldrich's niece. She had been, Bryn informed Lyra with careful diplomacy, expected by many at court to become the king's chosen mate. She approached Lyra in the garden 3 days after the incident at the window. Her smile was flawless. "You must find our winters quite brutal," she said. "I imagine Ashvale was simpler, less demanding." "I managed," Lyra said. Seraphine tilted her head. "Of course, but managing is not the same as belonging, is it?" It wasn't a question. "No," Lyra agreed. "It isn't. But belonging is also something one can earn." She left the conversation before it could continue, and made note of the way Seraphine's eyes followed her as she walked away. Not with surprise, with calculation. Which meant the conversation had been a test. She was still thinking about it that evening when she found Calen, and she had begun privately to call him that in her thoughts, in the great hall, standing very still while his hands gripped the edge of a table hard enough that the wood had split under his fingers. His eyes, when they found hers, were shot through with amber. She went to him immediately. This time she didn't just take his hand. She stepped close enough that her shoulder pressed against his arm, close enough to feel the cold radiating off him in waves, and she let her power move freely, let the warmth spread without restriction. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. The amber faded slowly from his eyes. Neither of them moved for a long time after that. "Thank you," he said. "Do you want to tell me what caused it?" she asked quietly. He was silent for a moment. "My uncle brought me news. A border clan is making movements. My advisors disagree on the appropriate response." A pause. Disagreement used to be easier to tolerate. She stayed where she was. What happens to the curse without treatment? Uncontrolled shifting, loss of clarity, eventual loss of self. He said it the way he said most things, without apparent emotion, as if the words were just words. But she had learned to read what was underneath his stillness. There was fear in there. Not much, but some. "Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen," she said. He looked at her. "You say that as if it's simple." "It's not simple," she said. "But I'm still saying it." Something moved across his face, too quickly for her to name it. He looked away. "Eat something," he said, finally, gruffly. "You haven't had supper?" She almost smiled. "You're monitoring my meals?" "I was informed." "By whom?" A pause. "Bryn gives regular reports." She did smile then. "I knew I liked her." And there it was, and a flash of something on his face. The ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile, but was the idea of one, the shape it would take if it were allowed to form fully. It was the first time she had seen it. It was, she thought, extraordinary. The nights had been her greatest danger in Ashvale. She hadn't told anyone that part, not in detail. She had skimmed over it in the terse account she had given when asked, reduced it to the dry language of abuse, kept the specifics locked away behind her teeth. But some nights in the keep, the memories came anyway. Bryn was the one who found her, sitting on the floor of her chambers in the dark at 3 a.m, back against the cold stone, arms wrapped around her own knees, her heart pounding from a dream that had not been only a dream. Bryn did not ask questions. She sat down on the floor beside Lyra without being asked, and she stayed there until the shaking stopped, and then she said, "I'll tell the kitchen to send warm milk," and went to do it. When she came back, she brought the milk and a blanket, and she said, "You are safe here. That is not a small thing. But I know it doesn't always feel like it yet." "No," Lyra said, "not yet. Give it time." The king noticed after that. She wasn't sure how, whether Bryn had told him, or whether he simply saw it in her the next morning, something careful and hollowed in her eyes. He didn't mention the night. He didn't ask. He cancelled his morning audience instead. He took her to the keep's library, which was enormous and warm and smelled like dust and old ink, and he said, "Choose something," gesturing to the shelves, and when she looked at him blankly, he added, "I am told reading is restorative. I have it on poor authority, but it seemed worth attempting." "You're attempting restorative reading on my behalf?" "I am attempting to be useful," he said, "and finding that I have very few skills suited to the purpose." She chose a book about star navigation. He chose one about territorial law. They spent 4 hours in the library. He was there when she fell asleep in the armchair, the star navigation book open on her chest. She didn't know that he had stayed until she woke and found a blanket tucked around her and the fire built up high. She held that knowledge close. Lord Aldrich moved his pieces carefully. She had been watching him for weeks, cataloguing the small things. The way he steered certain conversations in council, the way he sent specific information to specific people, not gossip exactly, but shaped truth, reality, filed to a point, the way Lady Seraphine was always positioned near the king at formal events, the way Aldrich always seemed to be present at Kaelin's worst moments with the curse, as if he knew when they were coming, as if he was causing them. She said nothing yet. She had no proof. She had only the slow, cold certainty of someone who had learned to survive by reading rooms full of people who wanted her gone. The trap came on a Thursday. Seraphine sent a message, via a servant Lyra didn't recognize, which was itself suspicious, asking to meet in the East Wing garden for a private conversation. The message was framed as an olive branch, an offer to set aside competition and speak as women to women. Lyra went. She was not naive enough to go without telling Bryn exactly where she was going first. The garden was empty when she arrived. She waited 3 minutes before she felt the change in the air, the wrongness of it, the smell of iron and something else, something chemical, something that didn't belong. She ran. She made it 5 steps before the door at the other end of the garden opened, and 2 men came through it. They were not wolves of the king. They were, she realized, the men from Ashvale. Doran's sons. Her power came up instinctively, without thought, flooding her palms with heat, and when the first man grabbed for her arm, he recoiled with a sharp cry. She didn't wait to see if the second would follow. She ran the other way, through the door she had entered, into the keep's corridor, and nearly ran directly into the king. He caught her by the shoulders. His eyes went from her face to the garden door, to her face again, and something in them, the control, the emptiness he wore like armor, cracked straight across. "Stay behind me," he said. He went into the garden like Winter going to war. She didn't see exactly what happened. She stayed in the corridor, as he had told her to, and she listened to the sounds of it, brief, efficient, absolute. And when he came back out, he was cold in the way that was all him and nothing else, his eyes clear and terrible. "They're contained," he said. "They're from Ashvale," she said. "Doran's sons. They didn't come here on their own." He already knew that. She could see it in his face. "Aldrich," she said. The word landed. "I know," he said. "I've known something has been wrong for weeks." He looked at her, fully, in a way that was different from his usual assessments. "I knew before that, but I had no proof." "I don't have proof either," she said. "Yet." "Yet," he repeated. "He's been timing something," she said. "The episodes, they've been getting worse, but not consistently. They spike on specific days, specific hours. I've been tracking them." She had been, in a small book she kept in her chambers, dates and times and notes on what Kaelan had consumed, or been near, or who had spoken with him before each event. "He's dosing you with something, through your food or drink or contact. The curse is real. I can feel it, but it's being accelerated." He went very still. "Show me," he said. She brought him the small book. He read every page. When he looked up, his expression was not anger. It was something older and quieter and more dangerous. "He has been my father's brother," he said. "He was regent when I was new to the throne. He managed this kingdom while I was learning to survive leading it." "I know," she said. "And he has been trying to let the curse take me so he can reclaim that position." "Or so he can make you take Lady Seraphine as a mate," she said. "Binding his bloodline to yours and ensuring his family's influence for a generation." He was quiet for a long time. "I need you to trust me," she said. "And I need you to be careful what you eat and drink in the next 24 hours. Can you do that?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. The council met the following morning. Aldrich was at his usual place, to the right of the king's chair, his silver hair immaculate, his expression carrying its habitual weight of wise concern. Seraphine was not present. Formal counsel was not her domain. But Lyra could feel her absence as a factor, a piece moved to a different position on the board. She stood at the back of the chamber at Kaelan's invitation. She had spent the night without sleep, sitting in the cold quiet of her chambers with her power running through her fingers, feeling it the way a musician feels for a note, learning its shape. She had understood by morning what she needed to do. The meeting was 30 minutes old when Aldrich made his move. He brought news of the Border clan, the same clan Kaelan had mentioned. He had letters, he said, from the clan's leaders. He laid them on the table and described their content. An ultimatum, he said, demands that amounted to a significant ceding of northern territory, demands he recommended the king accept. It was a manufactured crisis, designed to make the king appear weak or reactive, a position that would erode support from his generals, open a path for a vote of no confidence, position Aldrich as the reasonable voice of stability. She had seen it, mapped it, in the 7 hours between midnight and dawn. "My king," she said. Every head in the room turned. She walked to the table. She put her hand flat on the letters Aldrich had placed there and let her power move through them, a light touch, truth-sensing, something she hadn't been certain she could do until this moment. She felt it immediately. The forgeries, not in the ink or the paper, but in something deeper. The intent baked into them, the deliberate deception. She didn't have the language for what she felt exactly. She only knew what it was. "These letters are false," she said. The room erupted. Aldrich was smooth, instantly, his face shifting to the expression of a man patiently tolerating an embarrassment. "The girl has no seat at this council," he said, "and no standing to make—" "She has my standing," Cailan said. Silence. "She makes the claim," he continued. "I will hear her evidence." She told them what she knew, the tracking she had done, the pattern of the episodes, the men from Ashvile found in the garden, the letter at the bottom of the stack that bore a seal she recognized, Lord Aldrich's private seal, visible through the paper because the forgeries had been stacked in the wrong order, with the original correspondence buried beneath the fakes. One of the generals found the letter. The seal was unmistakable. Aldrich went for the door. He made it 4 steps before the king's wolves surrounded him. She felt it later, the thing that had been building inside him, the accelerant, whatever compound Aldrich had been introducing into his food, in small, cumulative doses. She felt it in the corridor outside the council chamber, an hour after the arrest, when Cailan's hand found the wall and he leaned against it, and she saw his eyes going amber at the edges and his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. She went to him without hesitation. Both hands this time, both palms flat against his chest, directly over his heart, and she let every wall she had ever built around her power come down. It was not gentle, it was like opening a dam. The warmth that came out of her was enormous, a flood of it, running through the bond between them like water finding its level. She felt him shudder, she felt the frost trying to reclaim him and her power saying no, firmly, absolutely, not today. She felt herself getting cold. She had not anticipated that. That it would cost her the way it did, that the more she poured into him, the more it drew from her own warmth, her own life. She felt the edges of herself going dim, and she thought distantly, this is what sacrifice actually is. Not a noble decision, but just the act of doing it without stopping. She didn't stop. She pushed everything she had through her palms and into him, felt the curse recoil, felt the thing Aldrich had fed him dissolving in the heat of it, felt the ice fracturing and falling back. And then she heard his voice, close, urgent, his arms coming around her. "Lyra, stop, that's enough, stop." She stopped. Her legs didn't work. He caught her before she hit the floor. She was aware of being carried, of warmth. Real warmth, external warmth, not hers this time. Of being laid down somewhere soft. She heard Bryn's voice, high and frightened, and then Cailan's voice cutting across it, low and commanding, and then nothing for a while. She woke to firelight. She was in her chambers. The fire was higher than she had ever kept it, the room almost hot. Bryn was asleep in the chair by the window, and the king was sitting at the edge of the bed, watching her. He looked terrible. She had never seen him look terrible. He always looked controlled, composed, armored in his own competence. Now there were shadows under his eyes, and his jaw was unshaved, and his hands, clasped together on his knees, were not quite steady. "You scared me," he said. "I didn't mean to." I know you didn't mean to." His voice was strained. "That doesn't help." She tried to sit up. He moved to help her without thinking about it, his hands at her back and shoulder, and then froze when he realized what he was doing. She was going to let him freeze, but then she thought, no, enough of this. And she leaned into his hands instead of away from them. He exhaled, shaky. "The curse," she said. "Gone." He said it like he still couldn't believe it. "Whatever you did, the thing he was feeding me, the accumulated poison, all of it. I can feel the difference." He paused. "My wolf is quiet for the first time in 8 years." "Good," she said. "Good," he repeated, as if the word tasted strange. "Lyra." She looked at him. There were things he wanted to say. She could see them moving behind his eyes, the careful man's struggle with careless feelings, the ruler finding that his vocabulary had no words for this particular territory. "I brought you here under false pretenses," he said. "I told you it was a bargain, an exchange." "It was," she said. "It was an excuse," he said. "My advisors told me about your situation and I—" He stopped, started again. "When they told me what was happening to you, I didn't want to send investigators. I wanted to go myself. And I did not examine why until later." She was very still. "I think," he said slowly, like a man reading a map in unfamiliar territory, "I have wanted to keep you safe from the moment I saw you refuse to kneel." "That's a long time to not examine something," she said. "I'm not accustomed to feelings," he said, with a dryness that surprised her into a small laugh, which clearly surprised him. "Join the club," she said. "We have matching symptoms." He looked at her for a long moment. And then, slowly, carefully, like everything he chose to do, he lifted one hand and touched her face. Just his thumb against her cheek. The lightest possible contact. "I love you," he said. "I don't know how to do that well."
I should tell you that plainly, so you're not surprised later when I do it badly. But I am going to try. She turned her face into his hand. "That's all anyone can do," she said. 3 days later, Aldrich was formally tried before the full council. The evidence was comprehensive. The forged letters, the testimony of the Ashvale men, who had been hired specifically through Aldrich's private accounts.
The alchemist's notes found in Aldrich's chambers detailing the compound he had introduced to the king's wine, dose by dose, over 18 months. Lady Seraphine had vanished before the trial. No one searched very hard. Aldrich stood in the council chamber and in the end made the choice that proud men often make when cornered. He told them exactly what he had done and exactly why, in the ringing tones of a man who believed even now that he had been justified, that the king was weak, that the kingdom needed steadier hands, that a half-blood Omega with no lineage and no training had no place beside a northern throne. He spoke for 20 minutes. When he was done, Kaelan said 4 words, "Remove him from my sight." They did. The ceremony was held 6 weeks later, when the snow had properly settled and the world had gone white and clean. It was not a grand affair by royal standards. Kaelan had offered. She had declined the grandeur, requested the intimacy, and he had, this was still new enough to surprise her, simply listened. The great hall was lit with candles. The court was there, all of them, including the generals and the council members, and Bryn in her best dress, standing in the front row, looking like she was trying not to cry and failing. The Queen Mother Thessaly, who had been coldly sceptical of Lyra for her first 3 weeks in the keep and had then, following a very direct conversation over a very strong cup of tea, become one of her most formidable advocates, stood at the king's right hand with the expression of a woman who had made her assessment and was satisfied with it. Lyra wore white. She had chosen it herself. Not the ivory the court preferred, not the cream that was traditional. White, the colour of snow, the colour of clean starts. She walked to him without trembling. He was watching her walk toward him the way he always watched her now. With everything, all of it, no armour in it at all. And she was beginning to understand that this was what he looked like when he let himself feel things. Open, almost young. When she reached him, he took her hands. "You are certain?" he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. Even now, offering her the last chance to choose. "Completely," she said. He smiled. Fully, actually, the real thing, finally. And it was, she had been right, extraordinary. The ceremony was short. The vows were simple. She spoke them clearly and meant every word. When he kissed her, the court erupted into sound, not the careful, controlled applause of political obligation, but something genuine, something warmer than that, approval that had been earned rather than demanded. His queen. Hers. 6 months later, she stood at the window of the same study where she had first placed her hand over his and felt the frost reclaim the glass. The glass was warm now. It was always warm now. Outside, the first thaw was beginning. She could see it in the way the light fell different, the way the snow along the ramparts had started its slow retreat. Spring coming back. She felt him before she heard him. The bond between them a living thing now, a constant warmth in her chest, the way she always knew where he was, the way she always knew where true north was. He came to stand behind her, and his arms came around her waist, and his chin rested on the top of her head. "Generals want to know your thoughts on the Western delegation," he said. "Tell them I'll have notes by afternoon." "I will." A pause. "Bryn is asking if you want honey cakes with your morning tea." "I always want honey cakes." "I know." I told her yes. She leaned back against him. Outside, a bird landed on the window ledge, the first she had seen all winter, and cocked its head at her with bright black eyes before taking off again into the pale morning sky. She thought about the rejection ceremony, the cold stone under her bare feet, the crowd with its hungry eyes, the absolute certainty in that moment that she had nothing and would have nothing. She thought about the girl she had been, braced for what the world would do to her, and she felt a tenderness for that girl that surprised her, because that girl had been right to stand straight, right to refuse to kneel, right to open her hands when the warmth finally came and let it move. "Kaelin," she said. "Yes. Thank you for coming." He turned her to face him, tipped her chin up with one finger, and looked at her the way he always looked at her now, full and unguarded, the king and the man both in it. "Thank you," he said, "for not kneeling." He kissed her there in the warm study, with spring arriving at the window, and the kingdom settling into peace around them. Outside, the thaw continued, and the bond that had begun in defiance, forged in pain and fire, and the slow, stubborn work of choosing each other, proved itself what it had always been, stronger than any curse. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end of this story. These tales exist entirely because you choose to spend your time with them, and that is not something I take for granted. If this story moved you or surprised you or gave you something to feel today, please let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you have not already, please subscribe. It is completely free and it means more new stories can find their way to you. Until next time.